The warning light on Kalen's console wasn't supposed to be red. It wasn't supposed to be any color at all, because the ship wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The Galactic Council's deletion order had been signed, sealed, and executed 23 minutes ago. A cold, bureaucratic flourish from an empire that had long since forgotten the meaning of the word orphan. They had marked the ship for erasure, the way a coder deletes a corrupted line of text, without guilt, without curiosity, without ever once asking what lived inside the drifting hulk that had been floating through the void for 400 years. Kalen was the only human within 6 light years of that ship, and he was not supposed to be there either. He was a courier pilot, a barely licensed ghost runner who hauled black box data for clients who paid in untraceable currency and asked exactly 0 questions. His ship, the Rusted Compass, was a jury-rigged coffin with an FTL drive that coughed like a dying animal every time it folded space-time. He had taken the job because the pay was obscene and the deadline was impossible, a combination that always meant the client was hiding something. He hadn't cared. He was 29 years old, broke in ways that would have made his ancestors weep, and running from a past that had more teeth than any council edict. The job had been simple: retrieve a single data cache from a derelict council observation buoy near the edge of the Serta Nebula and deliver it to a listening post in the belt of unmourned stars. Easy money. 3 hours of work, maybe 4 if the buoy's security had degraded. He had dropped out of FTL exactly where the coordinates told him to, expecting the usual rusted wreckage of a forgotten council asset. Instead, his sensors had screamed at him for 7 full seconds before he could even process what he was seeing. The Orphan ship was huge, not in the way military dreadnoughts were huge, all sharp angles and weapon blisters and the arrogant geometry of power. This was something else. It was old, older than anything he had ever seen outside of a museum hologram, its hull pitted and scarred by millennia of cosmic radiation and micro-impacts. But the shape was unmistakable. The long central spine, the 4 habitation rings in various states of collapse, the massive engine housing at the rear that had gone cold so long ago that even the background heat had bled away into the void. It was a colony ship, a sleeper ship, the kind of vessel that humanity had thrown across the stars during their desperate, beautiful, reckless first attempts to escape their dying solar system. He had stared at the sensor readout for what felt like an eternity. The ship's transponder was dead, obviously, but the Council's tracking data was still embedded in the buoy's memory. According to the logs, the ship had launched from Earth in the year 2147, carrying 20,000 cryo-frozen colonists and a crew of 300. It had been headed for a terraforming candidate in the Perseus Arm, a world that had since been claimed, developed, and abandoned twice over. Somewhere along the way, the ship had gone off course. Navigation failure, maybe, or maybe something worse. The logs didn't say. All they recorded was the drift. 4 centuries of silent, aimless wandering, a ghost ship carrying the last unopened time capsule of humanity's second great diaspora, and now the Council had marked it for deletion. Kalen's first instinct had been to ignore the warning. He wasn't here for the ship. He wasn't here to play hero or historian or whatever the hell the universe needed him to be. He was here for the data cache, a quick in and out, and then he was gone. But the console kept blinking, and the red warning kept pulsing, and then a second message came through, not from the buoy, but from the Council's network itself, routed through the buoy's relay because the Orphan ship was too far from any active comm node to receive the deletion order directly. He read the order twice. It was short, brutally short. The Council had flagged the ship as a biocontamination risk and navigational hazard, and the assigned task force, a pair of automated cleanser drones from the Vix sector fleet, was scheduled to arrive in 14 hours. The drones would vaporize the ship with plasma torpedoes, reduce 20,000 frozen humans to atoms, and then file a mission report that 3 layers of Council bureaucracy would read, stamp, and archive without a single second of reflection. 14 hours. Kalen sat in his cockpit, the rusted compass drifting in the shadow of the derelict buoy, and felt something crack open inside his chest. It wasn't heroism. It wasn't idealism. It was something uglier and more honest. The memory of his mother's face the night the Council's arbitration corps had evicted their family from the orbital habitat on Xylos 7. She had stood at the airlock, clutching a bag of possessions that weighed less than her grief, and watched as automated enforcement drones sealed the hatch behind them. They had been marked for deletion too in their own way. Just another family that didn't fit the Council's metrics. Just another line item in a ledger that stretched across 1,000 worlds. He keyed the comm. The Orphan ship's old hailing frequencies were still active, buried in the buoy's database, and he sent a ping on every channel he could find. Nothing. Of course nothing. The ship had been silent for 400 years. But the cryo systems, if they were still operational, would have maintained some minimal power draw, a signature that the buoy's passive sensors should have detected. He pulled up the last Council survey, dated 73 years ago, and found the relevant data buried in a footnote. The report was clinical, almost dismissive. Cryogenic life support systems degraded but partially functional. Estimated 12,000 to 14,000 colonists potentially viable pending reactivation protocol. Recommend continued monitoring. Potentially viable. 14,000 human beings, still alive in the only way that mattered, frozen in the dark while the Council debated their fate for 7 decades, and then quietly decided to make the problem go away. Kalen closed his eyes. The rational part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive through 6 years of illegal courier runs, pirate encounters, and at least 3 close calls with Council patrol ships, was screaming at him to leave. This wasn't his fight. This wasn't his responsibility. The Council had made a decision, and Kalen was not the kind of person who could unmake the decisions of an empire that commanded more firepower than humanity had ever possessed in its entire history. But the other part of his brain, the part that still remembered his mother's face, the part that had never forgiven the Council for anything, was already calculating a different set of numbers. He tapped the console and brought up the Orphan ship's schematics. They were ancient, stored in a data format that had been obsolete for 2 centuries, but the buoy's translation protocols rendered them just barely readable. The ship's power core was cold, but there were backup fusion generators in the engineering section that might still hold a charge. The cryo bays were distributed across the habitation rings, each one independently powered, which meant that even if most of them had failed, some might still be operational. And there was a docking port near the ship's bow, marked as emergency access only, that looked like it might still seal if he could get the outer hatch to cycle. 14 hours, he didn't have time to save all of them, but maybe, just maybe, he had time to save some of them. The rusted compass shuddered as he fired the maneuvering thrusters and began a slow, careful approach to the Orphan ship. The closer he got, the more the scale of it pressed against his senses. The hull was huge, yes, but it was also wrong in ways he couldn't immediately articulate. The damage wasn't random. The pitting and scarring followed patterns. Long, deliberate streaks that suggested something had tried to carve into the ship's exterior. Weapons fire? Maybe. But the angles were wrong for a military engagement. Whatever had struck this ship had come from multiple directions at once, and it had kept coming long after any rational attacker would have withdrawn. He pushed the thought aside and focused on the docking port. The outer hatch was sealed, its surface crusted with micrometeorite debris, but the emergency release was still intact. He matched velocity, extended the rusted compass's umbilical, and waited while the docking clamp struggled to find purchase on the ancient hull. The connection was tenuous at best. A stiff breeze from the ship's failing structural integrity would snap it, but it held. The airlock cycled. Kalen checked his suit seals, grabbed a portable power pack and a med kit, and stepped into the Orphan ship. The air was cold. Not just cold. Ancient. It smelled of ozone, metal fatigue, and something else. Something organic and wrong that he couldn't name. His helmet lights flickered across the corridor beyond the airlock, revealing walls that had once been white but were now stained a deep, sickly yellow. The emergency lighting was dead, but the ship's backup batteries had preserved a few scattered panels, casting the corridor in pools of weak, wavering light that made the shadows seem alive. He moved quickly, following the ship's internal maps to the nearest cryo bay. The maps were old, and the ship had shifted in ways that no schematic could account for. Bulkheads had buckled, Corridors had collapsed, and entire sections had been sealed off by emergency hatches that looked like they had been welded shut from the inside. He had to reroute 3 times, climbing through maintenance shafts and crawling under twisted support beams, before he finally reached the cryo bay's entrance. The hatch was open. Not sealed, not welded, just open, hanging slightly askew on its hinges like someone had walked through it and never bothered to close it behind them. Kalen's heart rate spiked. He drew the small plasma cutter from his belt. Not a weapon, not really, but better than nothing, and stepped through the hatch. The cryo bay was a graveyard. The pods were arranged in neat rows 6 high, stretching back into the darkness as far as his lights could reach. Most of them were dark, their displays dead, their occupants long since turned to frozen dust by the slow failure of their life support systems. But some of them were still glowing, faint, flickering blue lights that pulsed in irregular rhythms, like the heartbeat of a dying animal. He checked the nearest active pod. The display was cracked, half the text unreadable, but he could make out the vital signs: body temperature, brain activity, heart rate. The colonist inside was alive, barely, but alive. He moved down the row, checking pod after pod. Some were empty. The glass shattered, the interiors dark, the occupants simply gone. Others were intact but dark, their displays showing flat-lined vitals and timestamps that measured death in decades, not days. But enough were active. Dozens. Maybe more. He counted 23 in the first row alone, and there were 12 rows in this bay, and there were 12 bays spread across the habitation rings. 12,000. Maybe more. He found the bay's master control panel and pulled up the status report. The data was fragmented, corrupted by centuries of bit rot, but the summary was clear enough. Approximately 8,400 colonists still viable across all cryo bays. The rest had died, some from system failures, some from causes the ship's logs had never recorded, and some from something else, something that had left brief, cryptic entries in the maintenance records that Kalen couldn't fully parse. Containment breach, one entry read, dated 287 years ago. Unknown biological agent detected in Bay 7. Quarantine protocols activated. Bay 7 sealed. Read another, dated 3 days later. All personnel in Bay 7 presumed lost. Recommend immediate sterilization of affected section. Sterilization impossible. Read a third. Agent has spread to adjacent systems. Recommend evacuation of all habitation rings. There were no more entries after that. The ship's log had gone silent and the ship had started drifting, and for almost 3 centuries, no one had known or cared what was happening inside the Orphan ship's darkened corridors. Kalen stepped back from the control panel, his mind racing. The Council hadn't marked this ship for deletion because it was a navigational hazard. They had marked it for deletion because they knew about the containment breach. They knew about the biological agent. And they had decided, 73 years ago, that the risk of whatever was inside this ship was too great to allow it to continue drifting through Council space. But they hadn't warned anyone. They hadn't sent a research team. They hadn't tried to contain the agent or study it or find a cure. They had just waited, watched, and eventually signed the deletion order like they were taking out the trash. His comm crackled. The rusted compass's AI, a half-melted relic he had named Echo because it only repeated back fragments of what he said, chimed softly. Incoming transmission, Echo said. Priority channel, Council encryption. Kalen froze. Council encryption. That wasn't possible. He was a ghost runner. His ship wasn't even registered in the Council's network, and his comm frequencies were scrambled through 3 layers of pirate-grade encryption. There was no way the Council should have been able to find him here. He opened the channel. A voice, cold, precise, and utterly without emotion, filled his helmet. Unidentified human vessel. This is the Council Cleanser Drone Nexus, operating under Authorization Code 77 Theta Gray. You are in violation of Council Deletion Order 9001. You have been observed approaching a marked deletion target. Your presence constitutes interference with a sanctioned Council operation. You will depart the area immediately. If you fail to comply, you will be designated as a secondary target and neutralized. 14 hours. That's what the order had said. 14 hours until the cleanser drones arrived. The drones were already here. Kalen ran back to the airlock, his boots pounding against the deck plates, his breath fogging the inside of his helmet. He had been so focused on the ship, on the colonists, on the impossible weight of what he was seeing, that he had forgotten the one rule that had kept him alive for 6 years. The Council always lies. The drones hadn't been 14 hours away. They had been waiting, watching, letting him board the Orphan ship so they could destroy them both at once, and then file a report that said the human courier had been an unexpected complication, collateral damage, in an otherwise routine deletion. He reached the airlock and slammed the cycle button. The outer hatch ground open, slower than it should have, and he saw the rusted compass still attached to the umbilical, its running lights blinking in the darkness. Beyond it, less than 10 kilometers away and closing fast, were two massive shapes, angular, weapon-studded, their hulls gleaming with the cold arrogance of Council engineering. The cleanser drones. They were bigger than his ship, faster, and they were armed with plasma torpedoes that could turn the Orphan ship into a cloud of radioactive gas in less than a minute. He scrambled through the umbilical, sealed the hatch behind him, and dropped into the rusted compass's cockpit. His hands moved across the controls, firing up the engines, calculating an FTL jump, running the numbers on how fast he could get out of here. The answer came back in less than a second, not fast enough. The drones were already in weapons range. By the time his FTL drive spooled up, they would have fired. But they hadn't fired yet. Why hadn't they fired? Kalen pulled up the drone's tactical data, feeding it through Echo's limited processing power. The drones were in formation, one slightly ahead of the other, their weapons arrays active but not targeting. They were waiting for something, or someone. A second transmission came through. Different voice this time. Still Council, still cold, but with an edge of something that sounded almost like curiosity. Human courier. You are not registered in any Council database. Your ship has no transponder. Your flight path was not predicted by any Council algorithm. Explain how you came to be here. Kalen's mind raced. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know how he had found the Orphan ship. And that made him an anomaly. Something their systems couldn't categorize. Something that didn't fit their deterministic models. Anomalies made the Council nervous. Nervous people made mistakes. He keyed the comm and said the only thing he could think of. I'm here to offer you a deal. Silence. Long enough that he thought they had simply decided to fire. Then, humans do not make deals with the Council. Humans comply with Council directives. You are not in a position to negotiate. I'm the only human who knows what's on that ship, Kalen said, forcing his voice to stay steady. I've seen the logs. I know about the containment breach. I know about the biological agent. And I know that you've known about it for 73 years and done nothing except wait for it to become someone else's problem. Another silence. Longer this time. You have accessed restricted Council data, the voice said. That is a capital offense. Your life is already forfeit. Then you've got nothing to lose by hearing me out, Kalen said. You said I wasn't predicted by your algorithms. That means I'm a variable you didn't account for. And variables like me, we tend to cause problems for systems that think they've got everything figured out. He paused, letting the words sink in. Here's my deal. You let me take the colonists. All of them. I'll move them to my ship. It'll take multiple trips, but I've got 14 hours before your original timeline, and that should be enough to get the ones who are still viable. You let me do that, and you don't fire on me or the ship until I'm done, and in return I give you something you want more than a clean deletion report. And what? The voice said. Could you possibly give us? Kalen smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. The truth about what happened on that ship. The real truth. Not the sanitized version your survey teams filed 73 years ago. The stuff they didn't want to put in writing because it would have forced you to act instead of just waiting. The drones drifted closer. Kalen could see the plasma torpedo launchers now, their targeting sensors sweeping across the rusted compass and the Orphan ship behind it. One twitch, one wrong word, and they would both cease to exist. But the drones didn't fire. And after a long, terrible moment, the voice came back. "You have 1 hour." Kalen didn't waste a second. He was back on the Orphan ship before the transmission ended, moving through the corridors with a speed that bordered on panic. 1 hour. Not 14 hours. Not nearly enough time. But the Council had given him an inch, and he was going to take it and stretch it until it broke. He started with the nearest cryo bay, the one he had already mapped, and began the brutal, painstaking work of extracting the viable colonists. The pods were designed for emergency release, a manual override that would begin the thawing process and eject the occupant into a mobile stasis unit that could be transported to another vessel. The problem was that the mobile units were all 400 years old, their batteries long since dead, their seals cracked and leaking. He had to rig his own power packs to each pod, bypassing the ship's dead systems, praying that the ancient electronics wouldn't fail and cook the occupant alive. The first colonist came out of the pod in a cloud of frozen vapor, their body limp and pale, their chest barely moving. Kalen checked the vitals, weak but stable, and dragged the mobile stasis unit back to the rusted compass. His ship's cargo bay was small, designed for data crates and smuggling compartments, not for human bodies. But he packed them in anyway, stacking the stasis units 3 high, securing them with cargo straps that had never been tested for this kind of weight. He made 4 trips in the first 20 minutes, 23 colonists, then 38, then 52. His muscles screamed, his suit's oxygen reserves dropped to dangerous levels, and his hands shook from a combination of adrenaline and the cold that seeped through his thermal layers. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Every colonist he pulled from those pods was someone the Council had tried to erase, and everyone he saved was a middle finger to an empire that had forgotten what it meant to value a single human life. The drones watched. He could feel their sensors on him, tracking his every movement, recording every colonist he loaded onto his ship. They didn't interfere. They didn't help. They just watched. And Kalen knew that somewhere in the cold, mathematical heart of the Council's command network, a log was being updated. Human courier retrieving viable biological assets. Reason unknown. Continue observation. At 53 minutes, he was in Bay 4, trying to decide whether to risk pulling a colonist from a pod with a cracked display and fluctuating vitals, when Echo's voice crackled through his helmet. Incoming transmission. Cleanser drone Nexus. Priority channel. He opened the channel. The cold voice was back, but this time there was something different underneath it. Something that sounded almost like confusion. Human courier. We have completed our analysis of your vessel's flight path and the Orphan ship's historical telemetry. There is an inconsistency that our models cannot resolve. I'm busy, Kalen said, not looking up from the pod. Can this wait? No. The inconsistency is significant. Your vessel did not arrive at this location by chance. Someone provided you with the coordinates. Someone who knew about the deletion order. Someone who wanted you to find this ship before we could destroy it. Kalen's hands stopped moving. He straightened up, his heart suddenly pounding for a different reason. Who? He asked. That is the inconsistency, the voice said. The coordinates were transmitted to your vessel from a source we cannot identify. The transmission originated from within the Orphan ship itself, and it was sent 412 years ago. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. 412 years ago, before the ship had even launched from Earth, before Kalen had been born, before his grandparents had been born. Someone had sent a message from this ship to a courier who wouldn't exist for 4 centuries, a message that had somehow found him across the vast gulf of time and space and drawn him here, to this moment, to this decision. He looked down at the pod. The colonist inside was a woman, her face frozen in an expression that might have been peace or might have been terror. Her name was on the display, Zara Vaughn, age 34, occupation, exobiologist. She had been part of the ship's science team, the one tasked with studying whatever they found at their destination. But they had never reached their destination. Kalen reached out and touched the cold glass of the pod. Echo, he said slowly. Can you trace that transmission? Find out which part of the ship it came from? Working, Echo said. Transmission originated in Bay 7. Bay 7. The sealed bay. The containment breach. Kalen stepped back from the pod, his mind reeling. The Council had been afraid of this ship for 73 years, but the ship had been afraid of itself for much longer. Someone on board, someone in Bay 7, had known what was coming, had known about the biological agent, the containment breach, the slow death of the ship and its frozen passengers, and that someone had somehow impossibly reached across 4 centuries to pull Kalen into this nightmare. He didn't believe in destiny. He didn't believe in fate or prophecy or any of the other comforting lies that humans told themselves to make sense of a universe that didn't care. But he believed in evidence, and the evidence was telling him that whatever was inside Bay 7 had been waiting for him for a very, very long time. 1 hour, the drone's voice reminded him. You have 7 minutes remaining. Kalen looked at the colonist in the pod, Zara Vaughn, exobiologist, a woman who had been frozen for 400 years while the answer to her ship's mystery festered in a sealed bay just a few hundred meters away. Then he looked at the corridor behind him, the one that led deeper into the ship toward Bay 7 and whatever horror or salvation waited there. He had 7 minutes. He could spend them pulling more colonists, saving more lives, doing the work that felt real and tangible and right. Or he could follow the transmission, open the sealed bay, and find out why a dead ship had reached across time to find him. The Council's drones were waiting. The Orphans were waiting. And somewhere in Bay 7, something was waiting too. Kalen made his choice. He turned away from the cryo bay and walked into the darkness.